Good afternoon. Welcome to the Thomas Fisher Rare Book Library and the second installment of the Fisher's video podcast series, Between the Pillars. My name is John Shoesmith. I am the Outreach Librarian here at the Fisher Library. And for those that missed the first installment, which we did 2 weeks ago, I'll tell you a little bit about this series. We initiated this podcast series as a means to stay connected to our community, our researchers, our donors, our friends of Fisher, and the general public too, the people that just come into this building all the time and admire the building, the interior, and look at the exhibition. So we wanted to at least initiate something that we can stay connected to the community. But we also want to take you behind the scenes a little bit of the library for you to get to know some of our collections a bit more, some of our really high prestige collections, which we'll be talking about today, but also some of the sort of the lesser known collections as well, some of the things that you may not be familiar with that we hold here at the Fisher Library. So as the series continues, you'll see some of those collections highlighted. But we also wanted you to get to know our librarians and archivists, the staff here at the library that are so passionate about the work that we do, and that curate these collections, that make them accessible to our researchers, to the public, and who put on the exhibitions as well. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for the feedback they provided on the first episode, which was 2 weeks ago, which featured Michael Kassabaum at the Director of Advancement at UTL. And we looked at Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. And based on your feedback, both the positive and the negative, we made a few changes. The one change you can see is quite apparent is that we've moved locations. We're now we're on the main mezzanine floor here with basically our main exhibition space. A little bit nicer. You get a sense of the interior of this building, the really stunning brilliance of this building. So we wanted to provide a better backdrop for the series. We've also tried to make some technical changes as well. We hope we've improved the sound. We've got to know the software a little bit that we're using, so that's going to help us hopefully improve as we go along. But since we're doing this live, there's always a chance that there might be some sort of technical glitch that we're not aware of. So please, again, if there is some sort of technical issue, do let us know. But we also apologize, and we'll try to fix them in subsequent episodes. So just before we get to our today's participant, I just wanted to give you another reminder that the Fisher does remain closed to the general public. However, we are still offering some reference and research services. I would suggest go to the website, to our main homepage, and there's a link there. You can see in terms of the type of services we're offering, and if there's access, if you need access to some of the material, all the information is on the website there. So with that, I would like to introduce Alexandra Carter.
Hello.
So Alex is the Fisher Science and Medicine Librarian, so welcome. And in case you're curious, we are socially distant from one another, so we're probably about 10 feet apart. We're in the same building, so we don't need to wear our masks. We're fine, I think, in terms of we're safe.
Very safe, yes.
We're safe. So we're okay with that. So today we're going to talk about our science and medicine collections here, the history of science and medicine collections here at the Fisher, which are, as I said earlier, two of our real standout collections at the Fisher. And I wanted to talk to Alex, of course, because she is responsible now for those two collections. And it's funny, when I sent Alex a prep note this week to see what we want to talk about, I asked her, I said, I can't remember now, were you a student here at the Fisher? And she reminded me that I was actually on the two-person committee that hired her.
Yep, you're way back.
Way back when. So I'm curious about, do you remember your first project you worked here at Fisher as a student?
Yeah, it was actually, I was still a student, and I was, it was an archival collection, a little small collection that belonged to a Toronto architect, early 20th century Toronto architect. And it was quite a challenge because it was papers, photographs, some 16 millimeter film, and it was a great crash course in archival description.
That's one of the things we make sure we do here at the Fisher when we do hire students, is that we throw them into the belly of the beast as soon as possible and get them acclimatized to the role, to what we do here in special collections. And I'm curious, actually, when you came to the I School as a graduate student, was it with an eye toward working within a special collections? Is because I know for myself, when I went back to school 15 years ago to library school, it was with the intent of working at a place like the Fisher, and I was fortunate enough to land here at the Fisher. I'm wondering if you had a sort of a similar experience.
Yeah, definitely. I that's one of the reasons I chose University of Toronto, because of the book history program that they have embedded in the library school, but also just the Fisher itself. Having these collections here, it is very rare to have such rare collections and such extensive rare collections. So yes, I recognizing it's kind of a long shot. It's very hard to get these jobs, but that was definitely what I was hoping for.
And then you ended up, from being a student, becoming the Nichols Fellow, is that right?
Yes, yeah.
And what kind of work were you doing with that?
That was more archival work as well, but I was also doing some cataloging, and that's how I got into the more book side of things too.
Okay.
And that was for, I think, a couple years. I was very fortunate to get sort of multiple little contracts stacked up in a row and just try to stay as long as I could, because this place is just the best place to work.
So it's interesting then, because obviously within those various roles you've done, whether it was a student, whether it was the Nichols Fellow, you would have had contact and some knowledge of our history of science and history of medicine collections.
For sure, yeah.
Yet when you got into this role, you've been here now in that role 2 years now. Is that right?
3, yeah.
3 years. Okay,
yeah.
3 years. There obviously was a learning curve.
Yes.
I mean, there's a learning curve. I think it's an ongoing process with all of our collections. But maybe you could talk a little bit about the process of getting to know the collections and the process you continue to go through.
Yeah, well, it's very much I'm still on that curve, and I don't know that it will ever get to the top of it. The Science and Medicine collections, there's over 25,000 volumes at least in both of those areas, and just the subject matter that's covered is so broad and comprehensive. So we've got biology, medicine, mathematics, physics, like early natural philosophy. Just I could list for the rest of this interview basically all the topics. And so I was very sort of daunted at the beginning, thinking, how am I going to cover all of these subject areas comprehensively or even at all.
Right.
And as a way to sort of make the project seem doable, I have chosen to sort of focus on particular areas in the collection that either the library has already established as an important collecting focus. So like anatomy is one of the big ones. We're never going to stop looking for those kind of books. Our Darwin collection is really extensive, so we're always adding to that. So I could focus on those, and then also focus on particular areas that I'm just personally interested in, just as a way to narrow it a little bit. So
for those actually that aren't familiar with these two core collections, maybe you can kind of you've sort of given us a little bit of insight into those, but maybe you can kind of give us maybe the Reader's Digest version, when the boilerplate that we always talk about when people come in to talk about our collections.
Right.
Let's start with History of Medicine, which, for those that can see, it takes up basically the top floor here, the 4M. So maybe just talk a little bit about History of Medicine.
Yeah, so History of Medicine collections were, they're based on 2 collections that were donated to the Fisher over the years. One is the Toronto Academy of Medicine collection.
Right.
And the other is the Jason Hanna collection, which was established by Jason Hanna of Associated Medical Services. And it still is an endowment today where we are actively purchasing more for that collection. And so, I mentioned some of the highlights in the collections. We focus on anatomy. Obstetrics and gynecology is another very strong subject strength within that. Also pediatric medicine are 3 areas that are focused, but it really is much broader than that. I mean, we've tried to be, it's a very comprehensive collection.
Do you have a favorite item from there?
Yeah, well, I can talk about our sort of crowning jewel of the collection right now, is our copy of Andreas Vesalius, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, which is probably his most famous work, and it's one of the most important works in the history of anatomy. And we're fortunate enough right now to have on loan a copy of the 2nd edition, which is actually annotated by Vesalius himself. It's an extremely unique item, and so we've tried to build up the collections around that. But that is the book I get the most excited about. That is the book that students get the most excited about when you can actually see this, foundational text annotated by the author. yeah, that would be one of my favorite items.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit then about history of science collection.
Yeah.
When we every year we do we participate in Science Literacy Week, and we tend to show the highlights, usually called from Euclid to Einstein.
Yeah.
So which is sort of a nice little frame from the collection as a whole. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the collection.
Yeah, so we have a general science collection, which is very much from Euclid to Einstein. In terms of dates, we're looking at medieval period to pretty 21st century almost now. And then we have a couple more focused collections. So I mentioned the Darwin collection, where we have first editions of all of Darwin's works, actually first editions and actually most issues of all of his work.
Right.
And then a third big collection would be the Victorian Natural History collection, so related to Darwin, but more his broader circle and contemporaries working at the time, so early natural history. And those are three collections that get a lot of attention for science.
One of the most rewarding parts of our job here at Fisher is acquiring materials.
Yes.
And building the collections. I mean, obviously, you talked a little bit about that as well, because one of our core philosophies here at Fisher is we build from strength. Mm-hmm. But I want to talk a little bit about. You brought a couple things for us. This is going to be the show and tell aspect of the of this podcast. So. You've brought out one book that we're going to show on our document camera here.
Sure.
So let's just show what we have. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what you have here.
Yeah.
And talk about too a bit, I mean, how it falls into you learning about how to collect in this area.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to show an example of, I had made purchases before this book, but this was one of the first times where I really felt confident. The story is I saw a copy of this at the Bodleian at Oxford.
Right.
I was able to see it and handle it, and I was really surprised to learn that the Fisher didn't already have a copy, because it's an important anatomical text. You'll see it's related to horses. Which
is there an irony to that? The fact that one of the first books you bought for us is related to horses?
Yes. Well, I found a way to slide my personal interest in here. I was a horse rider and a horse person, so this has been a way that I've been able to combine a book that will my personal interests with the interests of the library. So I'll tell you a little bit about the book. This is Carlo Ruini's Anatomia del Cavallo, published in 1598. This is actually a second edition in 1599, but it does have the plates from the first edition. And I'll just slip through to a more interesting page with some of the illustrations here. So this was a really significant book because it was the first book devoted entirely to the anatomy of a non-human animal. And so there's a lot of reasons why a horse may have been the first animal that was focused on, but probably the most obvious one is just that horses were very important, expensive, valuable commodities, if you will, at this time. It wasn't saying, their anatomy is like humans, and that's why we're doing it. But the 16th century was a very important time for a lot of breakthroughs in anatomy, same time as Vesalius. And that's the Vesalius connection here. A lot of people have drawn, noticed the similarities in the illustrations, and even tried to tie the artist of Vesalius's plates to whoever the artist of this was. We don't know. And so I'll flip to the one page that really makes the connection clear. If anyone is familiar with Vesalius's drawings of the muscle men with a sort of pastoral background in the background.
Wow.
You can see it's pretty much exactly the same, only instead of human, you have the horse figure in these. So these are really neat.
Was it daunting when you were making a purchase like this?
It was daunting. You have to do a lot of research. There's a temptation to, when you see something you really want, buy it. But you have to make sure we don't already have it, or we don't have a similar copy. You have to really think about where it might fit in the collections, and that's another way that I thought this book was neat, in that it also combines both science and medicine, and I can also have used it in classes that are interested in medical illustration, so you can go into the art side of it as well. So yes, it is daunting, and I don't know if I'll ever get used to it, but I am getting better. And as I said, this was one of the first ones that I felt pretty confident that it would fit nicely in our collections.
So this is something you went purposely looking for.
Yes.
To fill in a gap in our collection. You have another item you want to show, which is a little more kind of a happenstance. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
In terms of your purchase of it?
Yes. So I wanted to show something also from the natural history side of things. And I'm going to have to...
I know this is a fairly fragile
it is.
Object as well.
So I'm going to have to move slowly.
That's okay.
So...
Yeah.
Okay. So this doesn't look like a book, but it, in many ways, is. This is a clamshell binding, I call it, which is actually funny. It's not a clamshell binding. We had someone correct us on Instagram.
Oh, okay.
Because clamshell binding is a very specific term for an actual book binding.
Right.
This is
technique,
clamshell. This is also not a clam, it's a scallop.
Okay.
But I keep referring to it as the clamshell binding, but it's not. But here we go. If we open it up, and this is where it gets very fragile. So
right.
I'll try to do my best.
What's the date of this?
This is late 19th century. We don't have a particular date.
Okay.
But what this is a specimen album.
Okay.
Likely, well, because of the title page, we're thinking Ireland and Irish, because it's just going to tell you here. 1 second. Oh, shaky. There we go. Specimens of Irish seaweeds. So this doesn't have a lot of bibliographical information. You could call this the title page if you wanted to, but it's really just an album of seaweed specimens collected, evidently in Ireland. This was a very common practice for naturalists at the time.
Right.
Sort of amateur naturalists would go and collect. The idea with some of these is that you would travel to a new place and purchase this sort of album while you were there, and then go about and collect your specimens. So we don't know too much about who collected, or we don't know anything about who collected these ones, or which species they are, because they haven't been labeled. This would be sort of been more on the end of like a travel souvenir than a sort of scientific project.
This is not an item you sought out specifically, but wasn't this something you just kind of...
No, yeah. So the story with that is I just saw it, and I think within 15 minutes, I saw it in a catalog, the bookseller's catalog, and thought, this is perfect. We need this for the collection. So
right.
we're trying to. We have the artist book collection. We have collections
right.
that sort of try to challenge the idea of what a book is. And so this kind of hits a lot of different areas where it's talking about Victorian specimen collecting practices, but also this interesting book form.
Right.
And it's really neat that it's actually it's made of something that would have also been collected itself, which is the shell. So yes, that
Great.
was one of my other favorite acquisitions in the last couple of years.
Okay. Maybe just to end, obviously the collections here kind of represent our personalities a little bit. They represent, kind of our collecting. Do you have a collecting philosophy, do you think, when it comes to building these collections? Obviously, as I say, we build from strength, and these two History of Science, History of Medicine collections are so strong at the library. But what kind of lasting imprint do you want to leave on the collection, in terms of whether it's filling a specific hole that you think we might have, a gap we might have, or maybe just talk a little bit about your philosophy? Yeah,
well, to your point, yes, our collections are very, very strong, and we have sort of checked all the boxes of all the most important authors. And I remember when I first started and trying to get a handle on where to start with collecting, I would go and say, oh well, let's go. I would find a book and say, maybe I'll buy this one.
Right.
We already have it.
Right.
Maybe I'll get this one. Oh no, we already have that one too. Oh, we already have the second edition and the third edition.
Right.
And so when we say that the medicine and science collections are comprehensive, they quite are. So my approach was to sort of look for lesser known authors, lesser known subjects,
right.
So less traditional subjects in the history of medicine and history of bibliography and collecting. Also just looking for really interesting copies, so whether that's incomplete copies. Like this, the Ruini copy is actually not an ideal copy because it has this new title page on the front, and it's kind of a confusing copies. But I think, because we're using these books for teaching, that can be very interesting.
Right.
The other thing I've been focusing on is sort of more controversial subjects, and you can find those in the collections already, but they don't stand out as much. They're sort of overshadowed by Vesalius and these big things. So, I've been collecting a lot in the area of phrenology, so that 19th century sort of pseudoscience, anything that's kind of...
I've seen a lot of those heads.
Yes, they're around the library now, yeah. So, pseudoscience, pseudomedicine. We have a lot of students actually studying the history of eugenics, topics that are still controversial today that need addressing historically in terms of vaccination, women's health, and things like that. So my imprint, I hope, would be filling in gaps with sort of the lesser known and more interesting, well, what I think is the more interesting stuff.
Never gets boring, does it, in terms of what we can collect here?
Great.
Well, I hope people have learned a little bit more about the science and medicine collections, also a little bit more about Alex as well. That's one of the things when we open again, we hope that you have a little more familiarity with who we are as librarians, and you can talk to us a little bit more when you come to the reference desk. So thank you, Alex, for participating in this. Just a reminder that we're going to be doing another one of these in 2 weeks' time, 2 weeks today, and it's going to feature Laura MacDonald, who is the director of the Thomas Fisher Rare Book Library, as well as the Associate Chief Librarian for Special Collections at University of Toronto Libraries. And she's going to be talking about, it's a little bit past Remembrance Day, but she's going to be talking about the role that U of T has played in terms of what we have in the archives and the First World War. So we do hope you join us for that. In the meantime, leave us a comment in the chat. Please tell everybody about this podcast series. All the videos are being saved on our YouTube channel. And as I said, we hope to see you in 2 weeks' time. Have a great weekend, and thanks again.